we're going to go ahead and get started now. I just want to ask if people can see me and hear me. If it looks like everything is well. So let's get started. So thank you very much for joining us today. My name is G. Salim Mohammed, and I am head and curator of the David Rumsey Map Center. This is our first event of the fall quarter here at Stanford. We are so pleased that all of you are here today. More are coming online. We have currently about a little over almost 400 people. Feels like you're alone in your room, which you are, but in fact, there are lots of people who are watching with you. So you're definitely not alone. Before we move on, I just want to take a moment and acknowledge DJ Cruzada, our Center Services Supervisor, who passed away unexpectedly just over a month ago on August 23rd, 2020. He started with us when the center opened on April 19th, 2016, and has been part of the day-to-day operations of the center, really every major initiative at the center. This is our first event without him, and we miss him very much. So with that, on to the exhibition and the event at hand. So visualizing data is both an art and a science. In one carefully composed and curated image, the creator pulls together a myriad of sources into a map, which says not 1,000 words, but 10,000. I am, of course, talking about a map. At the center, we are fortunate to have an abundance of maps, and through the magic of scanning and the internet, have the opportunity to share these with the rest of the world. These are cataloged and are searchable, and each of these come with context and the opportunity for anyone to include them in their scholarship, or indeed for a facsimile to adorn a part of your home. Each map has a story or multiple stories to tell. The point of an exhibition is to bring together these stories and create a mosaic that tells you a larger story. In data visualization and the modern imagination, guest curator R.J. Andrews brings together the story of information graphics, or what I simply call maps, to eliminate the visualization of data found within these historical documents, most of them at the center and a few others elsewhere. RJ moves us from the origins of information graphics during the times of the Enlightenment to the 20th century through the lenses of space, time, nature, and society. This exhibition is the culmination of a partnership between RJ Andrews, who is a data storyteller based in San Francisco, more about him in a moment, and the staff at the David Rumsey Map Center, consisting of Andrea Renner, our relatively new assistant rare map librarian, and myself. In addition, Rayan Wang, our center services assistant, worked almost exclusively with RJ on mounting the digital exhibition on the Stanford Library's Spotlight platform. This exhibition comes with something quite unique. Specially designed as part of this exhibition opening. In this time of COVID-19, with our eyes glued to screens, the exhibition team conceived of a physical keepsake, something to counter the bright pixels our eyes have had to endure on a daily basis over the last 6 months. Designed as an interactive, the keepsake pops open into a 3D image of Charles Smith's 1816 rendering of a landscape, showing us the world's magnificent mountains, all to scale with scintillating details, such as a rendering of both Alexander von Humboldt himself and Joseph Louis Gay-Lussac's hot air balloon. I'll have the privilege of showing this to you after RJ finishes speaking and before we go on to questions. The first 300 of you who provided addresses, as well as 50 randomly chosen attendees, will get your own copy in the mail in the next couple of weeks. I want to take this opportunity to thank RJ Andrews for partnering with us and working on this exhibition in the last 4 or 5 months. In addition, we would like to thank David Rumsey for expeditiously providing us with new images, and to both David Rumsey and Abby Smith Rumsey for their continued support of the center's programming. We're always grateful for that. Thanks also go to Megan Trott, Robert Robacher, and Bryn Kramer for their help in bringing items into the Stanford Digital Repository to create the digital exhibition. Last but not least, thanks also goes to Ray Marshall, who took our keepsake concept and design and made it into a beautiful, interactive, physical product. So now on to our speaker and our guest curator, RJ Andrews, more about him. RJ Andrews is a data storyteller based in San Francisco. He weaves stories together by creating beautiful graphics that are informed by science and presented using effective design. RJ is no stranger to the David Rumsey Map Center. Yes, he first spoke at the center in May 2018 on the design genius of Charles Joseph Menard, his maps and charts, of which we have an extensive collection here at the center, and most recently in February this year on his 2019 book, Info We Trust, How We Inspire the World with Data. It turns out it was the last in-person event we had at the center before we had to go on lockdown. So we're grateful for that, to have that opportunity. Since March, he has been putting his skills to work for the federal government, advancing evidence with information graphics. The exhibition makes extensive use of the center's collections and a few others, and can be viewed in high resolution using the links throughout the digital exhibition. We anticipate opening a physical exhibition in the future once circumstances change to make that possible. For now, you can access the exhibition at exhibits.stanford.edu/database. I will also put that on the chat, and you'll also be emailed that after along with the recording of the talk. Just a little bit of housekeeping. RJ will speak for the next 40 to 50 minutes. I will follow that with a demo of the keepsake that we created, and then we'll open up the floor for questions. Please use the question box to ask your questions. You may enter them as they come to you, but give enough information as to the slide or the topic in question or subtopic, so RJ has the context to answer it at the end. So now, without further ado, RJ Andrews speaking on data visualization and the modern imagination. Welcome to the Zoom podium, RJ. It's all yours.
Thanks so much, Salim. Salim, is this coming through okay?
Yep, looks good.
Great. So in 1801, William Playfair published a new type of chart. And we can zoom into his chart. It's a chart that we've since really grown to love. And there it is, the world's first pie chart. Playfair uses 3 colors to show the Turkish Empire's expanse across 3 different continents: Africa in yellow, Europe in what he called pale red, and Asia in green. Now, this might be Playfair's first pie chart, but it wasn't his last. He doubled down on this design, and several years later, Playfair published a fancier, more refined, maybe more sophisticated pie chart, a giant sectored circle about the United States and its land area. Now, of course, Playfair didn't call this a pie chart. That term didn't emerge for another 100 years. But let's go back to the first one. Let's go back to 1801, because there's so much more to learn about this chart. There's so much more to learn from this chart. It's rich with Playfair's experiments and attempts to better facilitate what he called, quote, the attainment of information, and how to aid the memory in retaining information, what we call learning, or the acquisition of knowledge. Now, if we look beyond this small pie chart, we can see that there's other empires beyond the Turkish Empire. Next door, you can see Russia. And Russia has the same color scheme. You can see that Asia is in green, Europe is in pale red, but it's sectored differently. Russia has concentric nested circles, not angled sectors like what we now call a pie chart. Meanwhile, Sweden is green because it is a maritime power. Denmark is red because it is only powerful by land. And never mind the German Empire. Here he uses an Euler diagram to show the competing interests of Austria, Prussia, and other German principalities. Playfair trying to diagram and make sense of a complex competing interests of emerging Germany. If we look beyond the color scheme, we can see that all of these circles are comparable. You can really see that this one is bigger than that one. Well, almost all of them, because they're all organized in order of size, with the biggest Russia on the left and then getting smaller and smaller and smaller, except this one. France is so big, it seems out of order. It's so big, it should actually come directly after the Turkish Empire, but it doesn't. And why not? Well, the chart we've been looking at is actually part 2. This is the after version, after the French Revolution. The before version, showing Europe in 1789, before the French Revolution, does put all the countries in order of their land area. You know, Playfair is doing so much with this chart. And if we look beyond just the circle size, we can see the other 2 sources of national power. Playfair says that size, population, and revenue are the 3 principal objects of attention. And so we've already seen how he treats size, but let's look at how he deals with population and revenue. Each gets a vertical line extending upward from the circle's outer edge. On the left is population, and on the right is revenue. And then there's a dashed line that connects the 2. And this is some sort of proto-slope graph. Playfair says that the ascent of those lines, being from right to left or from left to right, shows whether in proportion to its population the country is burdened with heavy taxes or otherwise. He's grasping for a lot here. He's trying to show some relationship between population and revenue. But of course, it's a flawed visualization, because not only do we have 2 different scales, meaning that a horizontal line is really not going to be, is only going to be meaningful to how those 2 scales are set to one another, but also because the diameter of the circles are different. The angle of that slope is not comparable between the charts. There's a lot of experimentation going on over this whole chart. To fully unpack it, you need to read pages and pages of Playfair's own commentary. But the big punchline is that he got something really, really right. Circles are really appealing, and they're really useful to designers to play with size, sectors, and color. So let's put Playfair's chart on a timeline. Here it is in 1801. And let's go a little bit back, just 16 years to 1785. And August F.W. Crome published this chart that tries to do something very similar. It represents Europe's land area not with circles, but with squares, or almost squares. It compares the land area of Europe countries using nested rectangles. And abstraction helps in many really interesting ways. I mean, think about it. Is Italy better than Poland? Is Denmark bigger than Switzerland? It's actually very hard to answer this question by looking at a normal geographic map. To compare sizes, it's useful to abstract that number, that figure, into a geometric shape like a circle or a square. And then nesting them, superimposing them on top of one another, reveals their exact order. Additionally, removing the geographic context, removing the global reference, focus attention to just the plain fact of how big they are. So Crome did this 16 years before Playfair. And you can see that Playfair almost refined this design by expressing the same or similar data using circles instead of rectangles. But there's even more in between. One of the other objects in the exhibit is a copy of Crome, a 1709 copy. And it's one of the ways we know that Crome was a success is that it was copied. It was republished by others. It was imitated. Well, that's not the end of the story, because Crome, 30 years after his initial publication, published this, a revisualization, if you will. And if we zoom into Chrome's revisualization, you can see at the bottom that he was very affected by Playfair's publication. Experiments, inspiration, imitation, combination, trying to solve information problems. This is the story of data visualization. So I want to extend Salim's welcome to you to data visualization and the modern imagination. Playfair is just one of the stories we're going to see this afternoon. And they are just a few of the many stories contained within the exhibition. You know, we think of data visualization and we think of statistics. And the first round of statistics were really associated with statecraft, with the power of nations, with the operation of nations, with the competition between different states. Our exhibition looks at society, beginning with statecraft and then emerging to public health, social science, and more. Using data visualization to look at society is really about how we see ourselves and how we manage ourselves as people. The exhibition also looks at the theme of time, our ability to record history, forecast the future with more precision, our ability to have a shared story about when. And once we have a shared story about when, we start to live more in the past, more in the future, and less in the present moment. Our understanding and management of time has been so successful that we require a mindfulness movement to remind us to be present now. The third major theme in the exhibition is nature. It's all about our ability to catalog, name, study, explain geology, flora, and fauna. You know, data visualization helped us imagine the natural world as a coherent other, something to be understood and often exploited. So together, the exhibition is not just about how we created these data viz inventions. It's about how these data visualization inventions changed how we imagine the world and our place in it. I mean, imagine a time before the timeline, before the bar chart, before a real good global sense of geography about where you are, what's near you, what's far away. My name is RJ. I make maps, charts, and diagrams. And as a working designer, I'm fascinated to learn how others solve information problems, whether they did it over 200 years ago or this past week. There's a lot to learn about how to better convey information. So this afternoon, I'm going to show you two more stories like Playfair's before we return to a high-level overview of the exhibit. So as Salim said, please put your questions in the chat because we're going to have plenty of time after my presentation to talk more. The next story, we're going to have to go ahead of time from Playfair 45 years to 1846 and visit Emma Willard. Emma Willard was an educator, an activist, and a successful entrepreneur. Her many information graphics were a product of both real classroom testing, you know, what works in the real world, but also the need to stay relevant in a competitive textbook market. What works on the market? What sells? Her Temple of Time, maybe her most famous graphic, is a culmination of many design iterations on the theme of showing history. Let's zoom in. Here's Emma's The Temple of Time. You know, Emma Willard's perspective on universal history mimics our personal recency bias. The past recedes into a cloudy background while the present moment is most clear. The half-finished columns, each representing a different century, are unfinished in the foreground, rising halfway up to show us the administration of Andrew Jackson and showing us Napoleon at the beginning of the 19th century, with the old world of Europe on the right and the new world of the Americas on the left. You know, the back recedes into the clouds, but the foreground shoots out of the page, reminding us that time marches forward. And the flow of empires is projected onto the floor, and the two colonnades on the left and right mark the centuries as they go up to support a coffered ceiling. And the ceiling celebrates statesmen, scientists, theologians, artists, and warriors. It's a really, really distinct and really unique, and I believe a really beautiful composition. So let's look across history to see some of the objects that might have influenced Willard. So the ceiling is part of a long tradition of categorizing famous historic personalities by their roles. The most famous early example of this is Joseph Priestley's first timeline in 1765, which diagrams famous important lives across 6 different categories. You can compare those categories in the exhibition against Willard's 5 categories. Moving forward in time, we can look at other examples of timelines that use a river metaphor to show the flow of empires. And you can see in these river metaphors, and there are many of these, very similar, or you can see origins to Willard's floor map. And of course, Willard's floor map, this isn't the first time that we see it in 1846. You know, a decade previous, she published Perspective Sketch on the Course of Empires. And one of the things you can see both in the 1836 example and even on the floor in the distance in 1846 is the sunburst of Jesus in year 0. And Willard didn't stop in 1846. She took this idea and she kept experimenting with it. And so there are many different Willard temples of time. The third story I want to share with you is centered on W.E.B. Du Bois. Now, Du Bois was a prolific American sociologist and civil rights activist, and that's what he's famous for generally. But early on in his academic career, he did a lot of data visualization. And in the last few years, his work at the 1900 Paris Expo has gotten a lot of attention. And I want to focus our attention on one of the charts from this exhibition. Here it is, the amalgamation of the white and black elements of the population in the United States. So this was presented at the Expo. Now, what is this Expo? So Du Bois created a presentation called The Exhibit of American Negroes. It was a multimedia commemoration of the lives of African Americans that challenged the racist caricatures and stereotypes of the day. He presented his information graphics in 2 separate narratives. One focused on the state of Georgia, and the other examined the country as a whole. So here's the chart. The past is on the top, the present day is on the bottom. And you can see that the years 1800, 1840, 1860, and 1890 are not quite evenly spaced as we jump from a gap of 40 years to 20 years to 30 years. But that doesn't really matter. What matters is what he's showing us. What he's showing us is this explosion in population since the emancipation. And you can see that from 1860 to 1890, there is a big jump in the African American population. Let's look at his colors. Now, concurrently with this explosion of population, you can see also this sort of halfway mulatto category. And I find this very interesting because you can see that there are crisp, almost scientific lines marking the distinction between Negroes, mulattoes, whites. But the color does not stay within the lines. And I think we can read into this a little bit about what Du Bois thought of this type of census data. But I don't want to spend too much time on the color yet before showing you something else. Here's an earlier chart. This is from 1898. It's by Henry Gannett. Henry Gannett was an American geographer who modernized the topographic standards. He's one of the key founders of USGS, also the National Geographic Society. So Gannett first introduced this type of chart form. You can see that he also starts with census population and with the past on the top, advancing to the present day on the bottom. But see how Gannett and Du Bois differ from one another. Gannett stacks white and color against one another. There's a sharp vertical line with the colored census data to the right of that line. Du Bois flips the horizontal axis. He zooms in and he literally casts white off the side of the page in order to emphasize the point of his exhibit, the African Americans. Du Bois also blurs that boundary, making the difference between white and Negroes less distinct. So when you compare these two charts side by side, I think that you might think that Du Bois is a little, I don't know, childish, unprofessional, not very scientific. Gannett has a real, almost clinical precision to his presentation, and the typography, the fineness of the lines, the coloring. It's just, there's something that's crisp about his presentation that just isn't there with Du Bois. And you might think that Du Bois' presentation is unsophisticated. And I got news to you, boy, are you wrong. Because in 1900, when Du Bois presented all of these handmade charts, he was not only relying on work by past creatives like Gannett, but also his own work. Because in just the previous year, he published The Philadelphia Negro, a social study. And The Philadelphia Negro by Du Bois is rich with all kinds of charts. And these charts represent the state of the art in data visualization. They're very precise. They're very sophisticated. They represent a minimalism of data visualization that really took hold as World War I approached. Du Bois knew how to make scientific charts. And when we have this context and we look again at 1 year later to 1900, we understand the design context. It helps us appreciate what Du Bois was doing in 1900 even more, because you can see how intentional he was with his design. So let's put these two on a map. Du Bois and Gannett, 1900, 1898. Both of these works rely on the 1890 census. And the 1890 US Census is one in a series of US censuses that fueled incredible data visualization. Now, this wasn't the first time that Gannett published a statistical atlas using census data. He actually did that in 1880 as well. And it wasn't, and his statistical atlas of the 1880 census wasn't the first in America. In fact, another man by the name of Francis Walker did the same in 1880. And he did the first US statistical atlas in 1874 using 1870 census data. Now, Francis Amasa Walker was superintendent of that 1870 census. And the 1870 census is really important. Why? It was the first to count emancipated African Americans. Walker visualized its data in the first statistical atlas, and it showed the census's race category across geographic and abstract designs. Walker went on to become the nation's preeminent statistician, leading a variety of institutions like the American Statistical Association, the American Economic Association, National Academy of Science, and my favorite, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Now, this wasn't each of these atlases before you, the two Walker atlases, the two Gannett atlases, and the Du Bois, especially the Du Bois presentation, they're all built on census data, and they all have lots of charts on the African American population. And in the exhibition, you can look at a lot of these charts and compare them. And what's one of the incredible things is that you can see the influences of all these creatives on each other, because not only are they working with the same type of data, but they're often working with the same types of charts. And so you can see how they tweak and refine over the decades. Now, Walker has the first census atlas, but it's not the first time census data is used to visualize the African American population. That's done in 1860 and even before then. Du Bois, Gannett, Walker were all giants in their respective fields. In their day, they weren't most famous because they were doing data visualization. It's a really incredible story that we have these three men who are so powerful, so elite, so sophisticated, and in their own ways, all dip into data visualization and make contributions in this field. By comparing their work, we can not only see their influence on one another and evolution of the craft, but we can also get a sense of how elite America in the last half of the 19th century not only thought about data and data visualization, but thought about how to use data visualization to understand society. Now, the story doesn't stop with Gannett and Du Bois, of course. Gannett, goes on to publish one more statistical atlas using the 1900 US Census data. And in the same year, Du Bois also makes a very important publication, although it's not a publication of data visualization. Du Bois publishes a collection of essays titled The Souls of Black Folk, and it presented the intellectual argument for the freedom struggle and became a foundational text for the civil rights movement that followed. So those are three little stories behind some of the objects in the exhibit. We can take these objects and put them back on the timeline. And then fill in the rest of the exhibition. Data visualization and the modern imagination. I want to talk to you now a little bit about how to explore the digital exhibition. The exhibition is broken into 6 categories: space and time, nature and profile, exploring time, French chartography, society and economy, and slavery to segregation. Each has a very specific narrative, and you can click into any of them in the exhibition and read them on their own, and they'll make sense. You can also go from beginning to end, and there is a narrative through line through the whole exhibition. Now, one thing to remember is that all of the works on the screen right now are to scale with one another, but that context is lost when you look at these objects on your screen. Remember, these are objects in the real world, and some are much bigger than you expect, and others are much, much smaller. Okay, so space and time and exploring time are both about the idea of using data visualization to better understand time. The second category, titled Nature and Profile, is all about how we understand nature, and particularly how we use profile views to see where animals roam, where vegetation grows, and it has several comparative mountain views to help us compare features from all over the world. And the final 3 categories are all about society, and the middle category, Category 5, society and economy, is a general overview. Is a general overview of all kinds of different works across the 19th century that helped us understand and manage society better. French chartography presents 4 maps that focus on a very specific movement in Paris that produced some of the world's most beautiful thematic flow maps, And then Slavery to Segregation, the final category in the exhibition, presents the story that we just talked about with Du Bois and adds even more context with many more graphics. So that's the exhibition. When you see it online, it's going to look like this. And you'll see the 6 categories. And then when you go into each category, each object is going to be presented like this. You're going to have a window that you can click into and zoom with incredible images from David Rumsey. There's going to be a little narrative description, but then there's also going to be a little slice, a little detail that I, as a designer, think is really, really interesting. And if we look at some of these slices, as I prepare to wrap up my presentation, we can get sort of an emotional or aesthetic sense of the exhibition, but also of all of this work. Some of this is very beautiful. Some of it is very precise. We have illustrations, diagrams, abstract data visualization, flow charts that would be very, very difficult to replicate today, even with our modern computers. Some of these charts are very, very famous. A lot of these charts deserve to be very, very famous. So we're getting ready to transition back to Salim. And Salim, I think you'll be able to show us the keepsake. I really appreciate everybody's patience. It's not easy presenting across Zoom, but I'm really excited to talk to you about data visualization, and especially hearing all of your feedback on the exhibition once you see it yourself. You can contact me through the contact form at infowetrust.com or on Twitter at infowetrust. Thanks so much, Salim.
RJ, thank you very much for a fantastic presentation. This is, as you probably know, there's so much to delve into, and it's just really hard to cover it all in 40 minutes or 30 minutes, what have you. So I'm thankful we've got lots of time for Q&A. And so before we go into Q&A, I just want to give people a sense of the website very quickly, but actually show you the keepsake that we put together. And then meanwhile, all of you feel free to start asking questions in the Q&A box, and I'd be happy to pose these to RJ. There's a lot of you, so that's the best format to make this happen. Let me go ahead and share my screen so we can quickly look at the exhibition itself. So we use Spotlight, which was developed right here at Stanford Libraries. These are different exhibitions that you see. You can see several of them. We're over 110 of these right now, all over from the libraries, curated by librarians, faculty, students, groups, guest curators, what have you. Quite an amazing set of exhibitions, digital companions, that sort of thing. So the way I like to get to the exhibitions is, here's the exhibition, Data Visualization in the Modern Imagination. It just happens to be one of the newest ones, so they show up. But if you look under Maps and Geography, you're going to see a lot of related sort of exhibitions based on, that focus on cartography and maps and a space. So if you click on Data Visualization and the Modern Imagination, you're going to come to this website, and here are the sections that RJ mentioned. The sections are all here. I think you should take your time, going through all of these and, really enjoying each of the sections. I'm just going to spend, in the interest of time, just a little bit about, I'll show you the keepsake itself. So if you click on the About page, there is the section called the keepsake. And this is the page that's associated with the keepsake. What you see over here is a photograph of the keepsake, it's designed. It'll come to you in the mail. It's designed to be opened, and then as you pop out, you see this wonderful, image of the world's mountains made by Charles Smith in 1816. And I think it really, a video of this is really what does justice to this. So I'm going to go ahead and play a video of this so you can get to see all the details around it. I'm going to click on play over here. Let me see if I can just do a full screen. And there's some nuggets of information kind of hidden, and it's kind of just something that makes this image quite unique. So I'm going to stop right there, and then many of you will receive this keepsake. We've really enjoyed putting that together, and something that's kind of unique that goes with the center. So I'm going to sort of pivot now to Q&A, questions and answers. I'm going to start with, I'm just going to go down the line, and then if many questions are similar, I'll bunch them up. Cheryl Lee Madden asks, what data representation would you choose for citizen science based on the collection of attribute information at vectors, intersections on a GIS map that would safely protect anonymity of the public? I'm working on polarization, and bracket, she says, the gap between rich and poor and inequality.
So that's a very specific question, but I think that I don't think that the visualization is going to help sort of protect the data. I think what you have to do is solve that problem at the data itself. And so for that, what you want to look into is synthetic data sets, where you take a data set and then you sort of remix it so that all of its summary values are the same, but that all the base individual identities are protected. And so I did a project with an academic group, including Stanford and Berkeley here in the Bay Area, that we use synthetic data. You can see that at infowetrust.com/work. And it's one of the newest projects on there. Or email me and we can talk about it directly.
Great, thanks, RJ. The next one's really more of a comment. This is by Jose Gutierrez, and he says, more common than question, missing is any reference in any chart of the presence of Spanish/Mexican people in the USA. There was a Spanish America in all of North America before, and English American by a couple of centuries. And then we had Sierra Ladisau. She's actually a map librarian that I know. She also comments, Jose, I've always found the documentation of Spanish/Mexican people in the USA very interesting. Individuals of Mexican heritage were counted as white until 1930, and the full capture of Spanish heritage really didn't happen until the 1980s. So,
I mean, so I can't go sort of chart by chart and to say, this is who they're leaving off the map or not. But there's certainly many examples, not only in the maps themselves, but in the data where people are left off the map. I mean, closest to home is that the 1850 census is very, very important for California because it occurs immediately after gold starts booming. And like, who don't they count? They don't count all the indigenous people. And there's this huge undercount of indigenous people. And it's actually very difficult to know how many indigenous people were in California, circa 1850. But, with that critique stated, I do want to point your attention to one of the most incredible atlases in the Rumsey collection, which is a Mexican atlas. And I'm going to go grab it and drop a link to it in the chat window so that everybody can go see this thing, because it is just like, it is a work of art. Is really spectacular. It's the kind of thing that you can just pore over for hours and hours and hours. So yeah, there is some Spanish American kind of data visualization that's quite inspiring.
Thanks, RJ. The next question is this one. Do you feel that data visualizers have a moral obligation to accuracy, or perhaps an obligation beyond just accuracy and towards the outcome of their work? I thought of that as I saw Dubois compared to contemporaries. The outcomes of data viz can be humanizing or dehumanizing.
Yeah, so I mean, I think I've used the expression humanized data. I think it was really popularized by Georgia Lupi. And I think that we want to be careful with putting humanizing data on the same spectrum of accuracy. Something can be very, very human and very accurate at the same time. And those two aspects of a design, I don't believe are in tension at all. So all of that said, when you do work with data, you have to work with an incredible amount of integrity. For a couple reasons. One, I believe there's innate responsibility when you work with data, because data really is, especially today, very, very powerful. But then more selfishly, that if you don't work responsibly and with integrity with data, then you're going to destroy the trust that you have with your audience, and you will not have the privilege going forward of having an audience. And so, yeah, we have to respect the data, but more importantly, we have to respect our audience. And to do that, that means that we have to work with accuracy.
Thank you, RJ. Next question is from Ben Schneiderman. Very nice presentation and exhibit. Bravo. Can you tell us? Can you tell us about the acceptance and influence of these visualizations in their time?
Yeah. So my sense is that there is there's ways that we know that they were successful, and ways that we don't. And so generally, I believe they were successful in that there's a craft that emerged, it evolved, it built on itself, and it popped up, and it was successful in a few ways. So one way is that you can see that this particular chart was in print for 60 years, right? It went through 12 different printings, and it made its creator a small fortune. And so there are some examples of that. And then there's examples of success where this chart or this thematic map gained quite a lot of maybe not mass market success, but a lot of success in the halls of elites. And so two standout examples of this is the famous portrait of a French minister, and he includes a Menard map in the state portrait. You can see that. I have an article about that at Info We Trust. And then also one of the thematic maps, the 1860 census map of African Americans, is in the famous portrait of Lincoln and his cabinet. And so this is one of the documents that's featured, not only in the portrait, but also if you watch the Spielberg film Lincoln, like you can see it hanging on the wall. And so like this stuff does pop up. A third way of measuring its success is realizing that a lot of this work was really, really expensive. And so you can see both the US government, but especially the French government, the 1870s, 80s, and 90s make huge investments. And how do we know that it's huge investments? Not only by the quality of the work that their output, but they have to, like, they stop making this stuff. They stop making this stuff because it's so expensive and so burdensome. And so there is sort of like this surge in investment and excitement that leads up to about 1900 or so, and then it pulls back, and it pulls back from there, and it pulls back from there sort of not because data visualization isn't as valuable, but data visualization's really becoming democratized, and it's starting to be used not just by governments with their huge purse strings, but by businesses. And so you have the rise, coming out of World War I, of the modern corporation, and they're using data visualization. So like there's this whole wave of data visualization. There are textbooks, there are freelance consultants. Like it's actually very similar to sort of the ecosystem we have today that rises out of World War I. But that data visualization it looks totally different from everything that we just saw in this presentation. So I think those are all ways that we can kind of detect that, hey, this stuff was successful. But for all of these success stories, there's also pieces that pieces that are in the exhibition that like probably weren't famous in their day. And, they're sort of like diamonds in the rough. And there's things that we appreciate today that maybe didn't get the respect and attention they deserved in their own time. But it's often difficult to kind of like parse those distinctions out, I think.
Thanks, RJ. Next question's from an anonymous attendee. Have you seen any great examples of brain data visualization? That is to say, neurological data.
Yeah, there's a book published a few years ago on just about visualizing the brain. The brain's connectome. Network graphs are like famously like some of the like most difficult things to really design correctly and make use of, because they're so complex. Network graphs, it's like eventually like everything just looks like a hairball. But people do use network graphs to make sense of brain data. And there is a book which is on my shelf in the other room, and so maybe I'll run and get it at some point, or send me a direct message, and I'll get that book to you.
Thanks, RJ. An accolade from David Neely. He says, this is fantastic. I learned a lot about W.B. Du Bois that I did not know. Thank you. So Rosalind Morph asks, have you studied visual data representation in Asian countries such as Japan?
Yeah, so Japan's really interesting. I'm barely a historian, let alone a Japanese historian. But you have this sort of unlocking period out of Edo, Japan, and the influence of Europeans come in many ways. One of those is maps, starting I think with Jesuit maps, and there's been presentations at the Rumsey Center of like early Jesuit cartographers who come and map the Japanese coastline and this sort of thing. And then eventually you have data visualization, and data visualization hits the shores of Japan, and they actually imitate some of there's imitation of the French statistical atlases at the very end of the 19th century, and they produce, I don't know, like a decade and a half or 2 decades of statistical atlases that are mostly data, but also have charts. And so Japan was in the mix pretty early on. But really what's most interesting about Japan in terms of, the craft, not just of data visualization, but information graphics, is that at the same time that data visualization is hitting Japan, another invention comes to Japan, and that invention is the airplane. And when the airplane hits Japan, artists are going up in the airplane and taking views of Japanese cities, and then combining that experience with the tradition of Japanese woodblock printing. And they're creating what are called bird's eye view maps, a couple of which are in the Rumsey collection. And these bird's eye view maps are, I think, the most beautiful, perspective maps that have ever been created. And so these things fire off really, really soon after the Wright brothers' flight, like a couple of years, they start making these things, and they go up all the way through World War II. There's this tradition of bird's eye view maps. And so, yeah, that's my favorite part of Japanese data visualization.
Thanks, RJ.
Japanese information graphics. I don't know if it's data viz.
So, RJ, next question is from Paula Vedovelli. She says, thank you for this excellent presentation. I'm very excited to explore the presentation, the exhibition, I think what she means. I have two questions related to some research I'm doing for my own work. Would you happen to know when natural resources also started to be represented in maps and graphs as commodities? That's the first part. And then the second part is, was there a connection, personal or intellectual, between Dubois' work and Otto Neurath's work on pictorial statistics, the ones you show, and database in the 20s and 30s that we considered actually?
Yeah, so I think that, two interesting questions. So Crome, who we saw early in the presentation, I think he was actually more famous for sort of like what some people call like the first thematic map, which is a map of the products of Europe. And so around the same time, or maybe even a little bit earlier than the map with the rectangles, he does this map that shows, sort of like what's made where kind of situation. And so that's in the early 1780s that you're having like the economic products of countries placed on a map. And then, like anything like that happens, and, it's refined and improved. And so there's like a tradition of, kind of displaying commerce on maps. The second question is really interesting, which is like, what's the connection between Neurath and Du Bois? And Neurath work deserves its whole other exhibition. If anybody follows me on Twitter, you know that I got bit by the isotype bug pretty bad about this time last year. I'm not sure about the direct connection, so I don't remember. So Otto has this autobiography, and where he writes about all the influences, and I don't remember him talking about Du Bois directly. And that might make sense because, remember, Du Bois displayed these in Paris at a physical exhibition. They weren't published. Like, there's only one set of these charts. They're handmade. One of the distinctions between Gannett and Du Bois that I didn't talk about during the presentation is that Gannett had the full force of the US federal government behind him making his charts. Like, Du Bois had zero budget. I think he famously like had steerage, like kind of passage from America to Paris for the exhibition. He did have helpers, that there were other students and that helped them with the charts, but like the disparity in the resources between their two projects is extreme. And so if you didn't go to Paris and see these charts, the only other way to see them was that they were toured through America after the Paris exhibition before finally being cataloged and, thank gosh, like preserved. And almost all of them preserved. In fact, so my colleague Jason Forrest made, this amazing discovery a couple years ago, where he looked at photos of the 1900 exhibition, and then he looked at the catalog, and he realized that photos of the exhibition included a chart that no longer survives in the catalog. And then he went and pulled the actual photo, from the original photo, zoomed in, and he was able to reconstruct what that missing chart looks like. But the point is, Neurath probably never saw it. That's my guess. But I'd be thrilled to be proven wrong.
Great. Thanks, RJ. So the next question, I think I can answer this one. It's by Clark Akatif, and Akatif, I guess is, sorry if I'm mispronouncing. He asks, is the pop of the Burl Mountains based on the one represented in the entry stairwell? And actually, That's a different one, and that is the height of the principal mountains in the world, and that's by Samuel Augustus Mitchell. It's 1846, but I know exactly what you're talking about. They're very similar. The one on the staircase has both has the rivers on top, which also are they're to scale just like the mountains. So.
Yeah, there's an incredible tradition of these maps, and they don't exactly originate with Humboldt, but basically, like, you wouldn't get the explosion without Humboldt. Like, there are a few very geometric. Let's compare mountain sizes before Humboldt comes along, but then Humboldt takes his field sketches, invests a small fortune, paying artists to turn them into beautiful publications, a 30-some volume series that consumes the rest of his life. And that's what really prompts this, I don't know, dozens and dozens of comparative mountain views, like, let's compare the height of mountains, let's compare the length of rivers, let's compare the heights of buildings. It like goes on and on and on and on. Giopolsky has a great book, just examining this one type of graphic form.
Yeah, and we have an abundance of them at the center. So I will send out a link about all of the ones we have in just a second. Yeah. So next question is from Tom Paper. He asks, what frustrates you about modern day visualizations that the best historical visualizations got right? Sorry, excuse me.
Let's think. So modern visualizations is incredible. I think that what we're going to see going forward is the incorporation of more illustration. And so for the last, couple decades, it's kind of been like, what can a computer do? And what can people who know how to tell a computer what to do, what can they do? And so as you have more, not only the democratization of coding, but also just like, you don't need to code as much as you used to with better and better tools, that opens the doors to people with not only different skill sets, but different interests to come in. And one of the things that people could do, in the 19th century is that, like, they could draw, like they could draw, they could draft. Not every computer scientist, their favorite tool is a pencil and paper. But you really, I think, to be very, very creative, a lot of the work has to start on pencil and paper. And the pencil and paper is so amazing because there's no restraints. It's just an even connection between your mind and the outside world. Once you start getting into the computer, you start getting into these grooves by how the software, the libraries kind of tell you how to do things. And so I expect to see, an explosion of experimentation, and sort of a new flourishing, because honestly, the sophistication that we rose to with analog data visualization, by 1900, in many ways, we still haven't gotten there back to there yet with our digital visualization.
Great, thanks, RJ. This is a question from JP Panther. He asks, when you were curating from the Rumsey Map collection, can you talk briefly about a few of the maps that got left behind and why?
Sure. Yeah. So, there are practical things that happened when we made the decision from switching to a physical exhibition to, acknowledging that this is going to be online only for now. And so when the physical exhibition in the center is mounted, it will be a little bit different. There will be pieces that are not on the online exhibition. And these are for two reasons. One is because of, sort of very careful copyright considerations. And so physically, we might feel very comfortable mounting stuff that's post 1924 and less comfortable, less comfortable online. And so all the Otto Neurath stuff, a lot of charts leading up to World War II that are really interesting, like all that 1930s experimentation, publication, like you won't see any of that in the exhibition, but you will see it, once we put it out physically. The other is that like there's just certain things that work in person better than online. So online, you have a very narrow focus. You have a scroll that you're moving through something linearly. And so this goes back to the previous question about like, what are the strengths of digital data visualization? It's like the attention of people in digital platforms is very, very constrained. It's very narrow. You don't have a lot of time with them, and you can't do much with them. Now, in the physical exhibition, we're actually going to mount it in a way that it's going to be mounted in a way that it's going to encourage you to make comparisons between works and to bridge works with your eyes and with your attention in a way that's very, very difficult to do online. Online, you really have to have kind of a narrow groove that you kind of shoot people through. And so that's what we've done online. But the physical exhibition will have something a little bit extra.
And hopefully soon, but you never know. So thanks, RJ. Next question is from Shelley Hebert. Do you have suggestions for what digital tools would be most useful for people who are not professional graphic designers to create data visualizations?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many, but I would start with something that's free, because there are a lot of really great free tools. And I think that I don't have like a resource at my fingertips to say like, go do this. But if you Google like 2020 like review of data visualization tools or something, like you'll find blog articles. And my guess is that if you go to, I think it's medium.com/Nightingale, which is the journal of the Data Visualization Society, I think that they have like a recent roundup of data visualization tools that actually puts them on a spectrum from like very intensive, like everything is coding from scratch, all the way to like easy, like clicking buttons and making your chart kind of spectrum. And so like go suss out those kinds of articles and then like make some choices and like experiment and have fun. Yeah.
Great. Thanks, RJ. This is a question from Annette Greiner, and she says, thanks for a fun and intriguing talk. I'm curious about the comparison between Dubois' work and Gannett's, seeing it through the lens of a more modern understanding of the fallacy of race. Do you think the difference was reflecting contemporary open disagreement about the validity of race as a concept?
So I'm not a racial studies scholar, but when you read their work, especially Gannett's very interesting because, we like to, again, without being a historian on this particular topic, like I think we like to look at certain characters as sort of like-minded, progressive, freedom fighting kind of personalities. And like my read of it is that like you can see some of that in them, and then you'll turn the page and read something else that they wrote, and you'll be like, whoa, that's not cool. And Gannett's writing really is this, and that some of what he writes about, he feels like a modern progressive, and then some of the other stuff he writes about, is kind of shocking. But that question in particular reminds me of a passage when he talked about this mulatto data, and so there's this like this contraption of terms that were invented to try to categorize people by how much black blood they had, in them. And Gannett like completely rejected this system in his writing. He thought it was silly. And not only did he think the system was silly, but he also thought that the data behind it, that you could actually like understand this, he also thought that was silly. And so, we talked a little bit about that when we compared Gannett to Du Bois. Du Bois, I think, pokes fun at this particular racial categorization by kind of blurring the edges, whereas Gannett just like throws it out. He doesn't even visualize it at all. And so I think that there was like some live active critique of some of the racial racial categorization, that was happening, at the time. But that's not to say that like they had the same sensibilities as we do, like either.
Thank you. Next question is from Roy Mize. I think it's Mize. He says, early Tejano, New Mexican, Arizona, and California populations were not as significant as modern investigators often assume. That is before circa 1830s. How was this included in an analysis?
I don't know if that is like included in any particular analysis, but yeah, this is something that's kind of interesting. And Stanford has a center that's focused on the West. Slim, I don't know if you remember the name of it, but this is like definitely like a question, like I think for that center. Is it like the Center for the West or something?
Center for the West, yes.
I'll
send the link.
Yeah, I think they've done some maps and visualization on like populations. It's definitely a really interesting question, and like, yeah, like and there's like these enormous population centers and incredible civilizations that are built, Mexico City and further south, and then like you get up to California and it's kind of like this scrubby desert, chaparral kind of situation where it's like you just don't have. It seems, huge populations and civilizations, but, but that's a very rough understanding of what was going on.
Yeah. I shared the link. It's the Building Center for the American West. So,
yeah.
Okay. Could we talk a little bit about the relationship between these developments / visualizations and positivism?
I would have to like refresh myself on like positivism. So go to the next question, and then maybe we can circle back.
Sure. This is from a student pursuing digital humanities in history and anthropology. For an education internship, I'll be working with an elementary school curriculum. What would you say are good examples of presenting data to children?
Oh, yeah. So there's also kind of, and I don't have the resource at my fingertips, but there is like writing on this. I think that you want to make it really physical as you can. So it's like, so that they're like activity driven, activity based visualization. Kind of like putting fruits out on the kitchen table and, organizing them by color and then organizing them by size and then organizing them, like get used to the idea of like, what are you doing? You're really categorizing things and putting them, like what's information? It's putting something in a formation. You're arranging things. Like that's what this is all about. And so activities are really good. The other thing I remember is like, there's this great activity, and it's a Venn diagram activity. And it's like, you do it with construction paper where you have circles where one circle is yellow or one circle is blue, it represents the water. One circle is green, represents the land. And you put them on top of each other and you cut out in the middle, like a yellow thing to represent the beach, like the interface between them, but that's the overlap. And then what you do is you take the child's, like all of their toys, like of different animals, and you put them on the places where they live, where like animals that stay on the land are the green and in the water and the blue, and the ones that go back and forth are on the beach. And so like, I think that like, make it physical, like get them off the screen as much as possible.
Yeah, and as a father of two little ones, I completely understand. I completely agree. Make it fun and make it visual and touching is a big part of it. So those are good answers, RJ. Good examples. So next question is from Erica Machulak, and she asks, do you think that best practices in data visualization today would benefit from looking back at history? I think that's a large part of what you're doing anyway here. But for instance, there is a lot of animosity towards pie charts these days. But there are positives but are there positives that we can take away from the originals?
Oh, yeah, pie charts are wonderful. They're absolutely wonderful forms, and they're not going away. Not only because they're so useful, but because people really like them. Like audiences love pie charts. Like I probably wouldn't be. I published a pie chart and a set of pie charts in 2014 called Creative Routines, and it was really successful on the metric of like a lot of people saw it. And like I might not be here today if I didn't have that positive feedback loop that like that this this is working. So I love pie charts. The broader also pie charts is like one of the things that you can show everybody, and like there's a lot of like mostly like weird chart forms, what would have been called xenographics, and xenographics are wonderful, and I love sort of trying to figure out new chart forms, designing a chart form just for a particular data set. I mean, that's sort of like where we as designers get to really geek out. But there's also like a reality that there's a certain set of people that like you can show them bar charts, line graphs, and pie charts, and that's it. Like you can't even show them scatter plots. A scatter plot is like, it's not that they're not intelligent or not sophisticated to get it. It's like they don't have the time to figure out like what this axis is and that axis is. And so, it really is one of the fundamental tools that we have to reach a very, very broad audience. And so, yeah, pie charts are here to stay. The reason that it's interesting to study the history is manyfold. One is that it just gives you ideas. Like you can see like people in history, the designers in history, they had the same challenge, right? They had like too much data, and they had like an audience with a limited attention span that they had to, engage them and inform them somehow. So it's the same challenge, but they had totally different circumstances. Their data is different. Their tool set is different. And so because they have different circumstances, they're solving the problems in different ways. And that's very interesting. So you can learn that. The other thing you learn about historic creatives is it gives you some sort of tradition. Michael Florent von Langren in the 1620s makes the first data visualization. And that means that there's a 400-year tradition of people doing this and figuring it out and learning from one another and, kind of pushing the ball down the field. And that's, to me, that's very inspiring, and that's very encouraging to know that I have this, sort of this long line of creators, kind of that I'm able to build on.
Thanks, RJ. Anne Greger asks, what do you recommend we do to help the public understand data visualization, which is appearing more and more in the media and reports?
I think that to understand a particular data visualization, there's like, especially with successful data visualizations, stuff that gets a lot of attention. The first is to spend a lot of time with it on yourself, like to read it deeply, to really try to understand it, to think about it. But then after that, with a lot of projects, there's a lot of accessory materials, and there's podcasts about data visualization. And these podcasts will bring people on and interview them about how they made their thing. And so there's podcasts, there's also emerging YouTube channels about data visualization where they do the same thing. And then creators often publish kind of like behind the scenes, here's how I made it, blog posts. And so between like seeing it yourself, podcast, YouTube, blog posts, like there's a lot of accessory content to understand how people are making this stuff live, because we're all like, it's a relatively small community. It's a very open community. It's a very supportive community. It's a community that like, we're all trying to do this thing better. It's very much a blue ocean kind of philosophy and approach. And I think we really benefit from the sort of the open source, kind of ethos, where we're data visualization designers. There's so few of us across the whole world. Like we're really not in competition with one another. We're all trying to do the same thing, which is to inform and try to, advance us all to some sort of better version of the world. Uh-oh, Salim, you cut out.
Oh, sorry about that. Thanks, Archie. So next question is, do you have any suggestions, similar to the question we just had, do you have any suggestions for go-to online tools and software for building interesting maps and timelines, especially free or low-cost options?
Yeah, so I mean, that's similar to the question we had earlier. That Nightingale article that just came out is maybe one link, but I'm tool agnostic. I try to fit tools to the information goal, I've used a wide variety of tools just in the last year.
Yeah, I should add, we have our newsletter sends out links to these free tools. We have workshops for the Stanford community, and for Zoom, we allow the people to come in as well. So watch for that. The next newsletter comes out in October 1st. So, okay, next question is from Debbie Abelock, and she says, each year, National History Day frames students' research within a historical theme. The theme is chosen for broad application to world, national, or state history, and its relevance to ancient history or to the more recent past. The 2021 theme is Communication in History, the Key to Understanding. Would you say there's enough information that a high school student would be able to find that would you say that there's enough information that a high school student would be able to find that could help a student explore the Dubois visualization?
Oh yeah, for sure. I would recommend, there's a 6-part series by Jason Forrest, who's the guy who found that missing chart. There's a 6-part series, again, published on Nightingale, that goes really deep into what the exhibition was all about, its products, the whole backstory. If you want to spend some cash, you can own your own copy of all the charts because they were republished in a smaller format book. But that's not necessary. Like, you can read Jason's book, and then the Library of Congress has them all scanned in like super high res, and so you can see them all. You can see them all there. Yeah. Great.
I just want to also mention. We have just in the last month put together a National History Day exhibition, just like the one that we're talking about right now. But it's based on National History Day, which outlines tools. It outlines themes. It gives people a chance for students. To actually go in, and it's a great resource. There's lots of sections there. Actually, we Andrea Renner at the center and Andrea Olson from Branner put that together, and I'm going to put that in the chat box so people can follow up. So
I want to return to that question about positivism. So
sure. The question. Do you want me to repeat? Or?
No, I got it. So like, my home base as a designer is actually as an engineer, and like, engineers are, I mean, we're not like we don't see the insides of many like philosophy classrooms, right? And like we're fairly practical people that I don't think like really debate like, is this positivism or it's not. But I do want to point you toward one section of the exhibition, which is that there's this idea of social science, which I think is pretty related to positivism. And social science comes from this idea of social physics, which comes from this idea of like moral statistics. And so you have this very small group of men in France in the like starting at 1826 and going into the 1830s, and they have this idea that there's consistencies in society. They're like, a lot of people are committing crime over here, and there's a lot of prostitution over there. Kind of like these moral problems, and but it's consistent in that like it's always higher over here, but it's always lower over here, and so we know it could be lower. So like, why don't we like try to figure out like how to make it better so that there's less crime everywhere else. And it's called moral statistics. And it's this idea before we really had the statistical tools like regression, and frankly, even before we had the scatter plot to compare things, they were using data visualization to have like a very like moral approach, like almost like godly approach to understanding the social laws that people run on, in the same way that Newton explained the physical laws that matter runs on. And from there, you have like this this explosion of people who believe that they can find God's laws, like God's laws, meaning like how people operate, how civilization operates. Because if you can figure out these laws, then you can help march society towards a better version of itself. And Florence Nightingale is, I think, very much in this tradition, and what she was doing with not only data visualization, but with all of her other work, this belief that like there is a better world that's possible and we can get there. And I'm not one too much for philosophy, but I think that would be the most interesting kind of like strain to investigate. And so the society and economy section of the exhibition is where you're going to find all that.
Thanks, RJ. So this is from Jim Stanley. Again, it's about Du Bois. I'm fascinated by Du Bois' intentional use of blurring in his racial categorization visualizations. Has there been any writing or analysis? Can we say for sure that he did this intentionally?
So it's all like kind of like what my beliefs are as a designer. I don't know of a lot of writing where he explains what he did. We do know that like he put this whole thing together I think pretty quickly and without a lot of resources, but it's not like if you look at his other charts where two colors meet, like the boundary is blurred, right? And so like this blurry boundary, I think, is particular to this chart, but you have to kind of look at the whole body of work, to kind of make sense of that. And Jason Forrest is the person to better weigh in on this particular point.
Thank you. This question is from Addy Burglas. He says, RJ, the 19th century was a time of an almost maniacal focus on science and scientific progress. Did you come across any examples of data visualization that were used for nefarious / racist / imperialistic reasons or imperial reasons?
I mean, through a certain lens, it's like all of it is that. These charts are very much about power. And that's like a particular lens that you can understand them through. With the exception of maybe not actually. So like a lot of them are power in that like they're serving governments, they're serving activists. So a lot of these maps of African Americans in America, like they are being created early on before they're created by the US government. They're created by abolitionists who are trying to explain to people, like you've heard the anecdotal kind of like, maybe you've read Uncle Tom's Cabin, or, like you've heard like the anecdotal, like newspaper story about, how horrible slavery is or something. But until you see the millions of people enslaved on a map, like you really can't understand the scale of the problem. And like this is something that we're, so like it's all sort of like a moral power argument. And even if you like, a lot of these charts are also made for education purposes. And so there's this like incredible boom, particularly in geography education across the 19th century, and maybe even a little bit before then. And William Playfair actually is really interesting because he recognized that in 1801, and he actually noted that we needed similar statistical education, and he put geography actually at the service of statistics. And if you take the earlier interpretation that statistics is about statecraft, it's about power, that landmass is actually in service of statecraft. And when he talked about the need for statistical education, he noted how it's going to serve both sexes. And so in 1801, William Playfair is writing about how boys and girls both need to be educated, in statistics. And again, there's many layers to this. Like, well, what was William Playfair's like? How did he get money? Like he sold books, and so why not double the market? Yeah, so the power lens is like a useful one, but in some sense, it's all about that. Yeah.
Thank you. So next question is from Lynn McRae. It's so good to see you, Lynn. Lynn has had worked for the libraries for a very, very long time. So he asks, the exhibit and talk reminded me of the pleasure discovering Tufte and his keen commentary on historical data visualizations. Are there other good sources on this topic? Especially how data representations changed over time.
Let's see. I mean, so there's a lot of great resources. And in the exhibition, if you go to the About tab, one of the sub-tabs is about resources where you can go and learn more. And it has a list of some of my favorite books, some of my favorite websites, where you can go and, get other people's perspective on this, this sort of beautiful graphic history.
Thank you, Akshay. Next question is Matthew Rango, and he asks, can any of you panelists discuss the creators of these charts/maps in the exhibition with regard to art, pictorial aspects like line, shape, tonal value, color? Some of these scientists have formal training in art or design.
Yes, so I think that that's definitely a lens that I've examined these works through, but isn't expressed necessarily in this particular exhibit. I think one of the things that's important to realize is that we often attach a singular name to these works, but there's actually teams of people that produce them. And so the big fancy kind of like name that gets attached with it is the person who had some personality, some fame, money, access to resources. But like, what are they doing? Like, they're the ones who like are making maybe the equivalent of a sketch on a napkin, right? And it's up to draftsmen, to people doing until a certain point, like hand coloring, right? Like they're coloring these stuff with watercolors by hand. Like there's a whole artisan sort of manufactory to produce a lot of these works. And so to understand them through an artistic perspective, you really have to kind of understand the evolution of print technology across the 1800s with so many other accelerations in technology, just soar to new heights. And that's one of the reasons that the French thematic maps and the Album de Statistique Graphique, which are featured in the exhibition in their own category, like are so beautiful, is because the Crome lithography gets like fantastic. But that said, my most recent kind of exploration of these these works through a more artistic perspective is I analyzed 25 French thematic map color palettes and color texture palettes specifically late last year. And you can, somebody maybe can drop a link to that analysis, which is taking a very, very fine kind of like detailed look at an artistic aspect of these charts.
I just want to add that when you mentioned that there were teams of people working on these charts and books, that's absolutely true for maps as well. So while the name may be a Mercator or a Cassini or what have you, they're just literally teams and teams of people who are doing this. And you could just have people who their whole thing is to make sure the lines are right. The places are carved properly, the place names are carved properly, that sort of thing.
And one thing, going back to an earlier question about like digital versus analog, like analog gives you higher resolution, right? And so you look at this historic work, and the line work is very, very fine because you can engrave very, very fine lines. It also gives you access to a much more beautiful color spectrum, because the analog color spectrum is, print color spectrum is slightly larger than the digital color spectrum. And then also, like, analog gives your canvas can be huge. I own some old maps that are enormous, right? And then it's like, well, like, how do you convey the same experience on like a tiny little screen? Like, you can't. It's not possible.
Right. Okay, so let's see. Next question is, I see the note. I think I answered this one. Melanie Espino, she asked, I see the note about the collection. Are all of them at Stanford? Where can we see them in person if you're lucky enough to live in the area? So Melanie, most of these materials are at the center. The Du Bois material is digital, is taken from elsewhere, although we have other copies, but not at the center. Once the center, past COVID-19, the center is usually open 1 to 5, Monday through Friday. It's a special collection, just like most special collections. We are open. If you want to come and have a look, we'd love to have you. Okay, this is John Rosenfelder, and he asks, are there any new styles / techniques for small multiples showing a change over time by location that you have seen recently?
That's a very particular question. Nothing screams forward, into my head, but I'm sure there are. I mean, there's some incredible data journalism happening because of COVID-19. This has been I think that there's been sort of a step change in graphic literacy and the production of phenomenal graphics because of COVID-19. We're gonna look back at this. In the history of data visualization, 2020 is, I think, going to be like a real breakout year because of all the incredible work. And a lot of that work is in maps. This is not a small multiple project, but this week, like most recently this week, Washington Post, produced an interactive map where you give them kind of like, this is where I live, and they show you, like, using a radius. Here's all the people who, would have died in America if they were all, like, centered on you. I mean, there's just like so much creativity happening right now. It's honestly very humbling, like all the phenomenal work that's happening right now. And that's the strength of digital. Like, digital is, the data is bigger and it's interactive, and there's just so much whiz bang to it. It's been, as sad as this year has been, the work that's come out of this year is very, very inspiring.
Thanks, RJ. Another question, can you talk about the historical events that influenced the French focus on data visualization?
So, I mean, I think I can go narrow on this. I don't know if I can kind of, I think that it's something like the scientific revolution, and then industrialization, kind of like, it all kind of like really takes off in Britain, right? And like a lot of really great early data visualization like happens in Britain, and then that migrates to the continent. And France, particularly like in mapping, like just like takes the ball and runs really far with it. So that's like my general sense of the wide view. But the specific view, which I can talk more to, is that there's a French civil engineer, and he retires at age 70 because the government tells him he has to. And he's like, okay. And he's a draftsman. He has connections to everybody. He has a really good sense of not only the whole country of France, but also all the civil engineering changes that are coming to France, particularly the railroad. And so this guy sort of learned civil engineering, building ports for Napoleon during the Napoleonic War. And then, he works on canals for his career. And then again, he's teaching young civil engineers as a professor, and then he's forced into retirement. And he's like, well, I'm gonna just keep making kind of like, these cool pictures. And of course, the guy I'm talking about is Charles Joseph Minard. And starting at the age of 70, for the next 19 years, he produces like the most inspiring catalog of work. And I don't mean inspiring to me, I mean inspiring to the French bureaucrats, the people in his time. And what he figures out and what he puts together is very bespoke, it's very specific, but then the government takes that, particularly Émile Chesson, and Chesson takes that and formalizes it and expands it into hundreds and hundreds of maps. And so like that particular story, I mean, it's similar to the Walker to Gannett to Du Bois story. Like there's a handoff between like specific personalities that's just very, very, very inspiring, and Minard does it until he's 89 years old. It's incredible. And when he's 89 years old, or maybe it's when he's 88, he puts out that famous March to Moscow map that that Tufte sort of repopularized. Not a lot of people like remember that he was 88, 89 years old when he made that. Michael Friendly has this fantastic analysis of that particular work where he sort of reframes it as a piece of, as an anti-war protest, which I really love that interpretation of that piece, because when Minard made that map, it was on the eve of the Franco-Prussian War, and it was a war. Again, he was 89 years old, but he makes that map, and it's combined with a view of Hannibal's march, against Rome, the Roman Empire, and he's saying like a lot of people die in war, and war is maybe not so great. And like that's an interpretation of Minard's map. And sure enough, Minard flees Paris as the Prussian Empire is coming in, and he dies. He dies only a few weeks after fleeing Paris. And so yeah, that's a very human and very personal story. But I think it's Minard's work that inspires really the zenith of the French thematic mapping.
Thanks, RJ. This next question is from Glenn Osaka, and he asks if you have an opinion regarding data visualization. Yes. Opinion regarding data visualization being used in the current day with regard to COVID-19. And he says, I found the public's / published representations often lacking, particularly in the popular press.
I mean, I think that the charts and graphics have been really incredible. I think if you can critique anything, maybe what's lagged is sort of, I think it took a while for us to really convey the human experience of COVID-19, how lonely it is to be a patient with COVID-19, and the actual experience of becoming sick. And like, honestly, a lot of that storytelling, it's hard to do with abstract geometric shapes. A lot of that storytelling is better done, honestly, with photography. And so, if there's any critique of kind of like the journalism around COVID-19, that's like maybe like one small observation, but I don't think that's, that would be only early on. It's hard to criticize, the actual work that's been coming out, especially under the constraints that it's been produced. So, this is all stuff that's been, done by data journalists who are like hunched over their laptops on kitchen tables, working, remotely, virtually, just like all of us are. And they're combining their forces and still figuring out ways to put out really breakthrough pieces on like insane timelines. It's a really the word hero has been used a lot through COVID-19, and so I mean maybe it's not the same as a frontline doctor or nurse, but like in terms of heroic design efforts, I'm happy to use that word with it.
A related question, somewhat. This is by Neelam Ram, and he asks, the presentation noted the use and adaptation of simple shapes, circles and squares. We also often see uses of triangles, pentagons, etc. From a design perspective, what other shapes are often effectively used for multi-dimensional data? How far can the number of dimensions be pushed?
Like the canvas only has 2 dimensions, right? You have width and height of your canvas, whether it's a printed map or it is a digital screen. And so the trick is like, what can you do with that? There are like multi-dimensional, sometimes we call these radar charts, where you have many points around a center of focus, and you're diagramming, all kinds of things around that. The problem with, complexifying things is that you can't, you sort of lose the thrust, and it becomes less about seeing something with your eye, and it becomes more about just like a weird way of storing recorded information. It becomes much more about reading into it and seeing the detail, and like that's okay, but like the strength of this art is not like a recorded table where like you're gonna like investigate deeply. It's nice when you have that, but like the real strength of this art is when I forget the exact quote, but it's something like, when it focuses your eye on something you never expected to see. I forget the Toki quote, but it's something to that effect. Michael Friendly's still online, and maybe he can say the exact quote. That's the strength, and honestly, like you don't have to go too deep into geometry to accomplish that.
And speaking of Michael Friendly, he says, great presentation. I'm intrigued by your take on the late 1800s, starting with W. Du Bois, and going backward to Gannett and F.A. Walker. I think it was more of a comment, but if you want to respond.
Oh, wait. Well, yeah. I mean, I'll return. I mean, Michael Friendly's work is foundational to all of my exploration through DataViz history. He just put a link to dataviz.ca, and so he has a milestones project where he catalogs this history in ways that can be investigated in ways that are very useful. So his scholarship on this is a real inspiration, and it just wouldn't be possible to have any sense of understanding of kind of how all this stuff fits together without his contributions and leadership.
Great. This is Kira Peacock, and she asks, any thoughts on how data visualization could actually hinder the understanding of data? Boy, there's so many examples of that. Are there examples of DataViz being manipulated in ways that actually lead to misunderstanding of the data?
Oh, yeah, sure. I mean, like the 1930s, which isn't really addressed, but think about how mechanized societies became in the 1930s. Think about Nazi Germany. Think about Soviet Russia, building up factories and everything. And so, I mean, there are Soviet spies, throughout World War II, and then after the war, producing data visualization in collaboration with with the English in London, and like it's not known until later that they were spies, but they're using like data visualization to say like Russia's your friend, and like we're the same kind of people, and we're all happy. And the work is exceptional. It's beautiful. It's incredible. It's inspiring. But yeah, like let's go back to the original meaning of the words, like statistics. It's like statecraft, right? And so part of statecraft is like the manipulation, the propagandization, and like this doesn't come from data visualization. Like Tim Wu has this great book called The Attention Merchants, and it's all about kind of like the evolution of the ad industry. And like the ad industry, advertisements are old. They go all the way back to like 18th century broadsheets and maybe even before then. But like the modern ad industry really comes out of like these like I need you for the army kind of like posters from World War I, and they're really effective, and corporations take note of that, and you like have this like graphic identity situation that emerges after World War I, unlike what was there before, and so that extends all the way into data visualization as well. Yeah, it's thorny. It's really thorny.
Yeah, yeah. So this is from Graham Creasy, and he asks, given a commitment to accuracy and integrity, this follows really well. Given a commitment to accuracy and integrity, what can we do to reduce misuse of information?
That's a big question. So yeah, I mean, I see some of the comments too. So I mean, I think the leading public voice on this topic is probably Alberto Cairo, in that, his last book, How Charts Lie, is, very focused on this topic. And so he has lots of resources, lots of like continuing critique of how media uses data visualization, manipulates us with data visualization, like how they're doing it today, live. And he is really all over this. And some of his talks, which you can get like through his website or through his Twitter stream, I've seen him talk, and it's very educational and really sobering, how this craft is misused. And so, yeah, go see Alberto Cairo's work on this particular piece.
All right. Thanks again, RJ. So I just want to be mindful of time. We'll do a few more. We're getting close to 10 to 5 here. And so I'll just keep going, and very soon here, we may not be able to get to all of the questions, but it's definitely the majority of them. So this question is from Joni Brigham, and she asks, what literacy in viewing data visualization do you think we need to develop in citizenry now, that so that data visualization tools are, she means there's a lot of data visualization tools that are widely accessible right now. What kind of literacy do we need to view them, so we can develop, get educated as citizens?
Yeah, I mean, I would go back to like so data literacy. So my friend Ben Jones has dataliteracy.com. And I think, there's a lot of free resources there on like basic fundamentals of data literacy. I would go there and look at that. But it's, literacy, we think of literacy a lot about the idea of reading, but reading, like literacy is also writing. So it's both the interpretation of charts, but also the ability to create charts. But I really do believe like it starts with the reading. And I think if we think of those fundamental chart forms, the bar chart, the pie chart, line graph, if we start with those and get people kind of like really, really well versed in like how those work, like if you understand the fundamentals behind those 3 chart forms, like you can really take those fundamentals and walk to whatever data visualization like you want. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So another question is, are there formats of visualizing data that you have come across from cultures whose knowledge is often marginalized, that you think are very effective and should be more widely known?
Yeah, the answer is yes. I'm trying to think of exactly like, this is sort of like, what are the historic xenographics? I'm drawing a blank on kind of like a particular example. General, like, so the answer is yes, and I'm going to withhold comment until I know that the Map Center, Salim, that you're working, I think, on an indigenous cartography kind of situation for the future, and I think that that's going to be an opportunity to kind of like examine that question. I don't have a particular form like in mind that it's like we need to revive this. But there are a lot of weird xenographic forms from history that like we just don't make anymore. Yeah.
Yeah, no, so this is really timely because our next conference, Barry Lawrence Ruhrman Conference, is on indigenous photography, non-Western or native photography. And so we really want to interrogate that and really bring it out. In fact, there are events that are going to happen between now and then that sort of lead up to it, where we will be we're going to have a speaker who's going to be talking about maps and Native Americans in Mexico. So yes, this is something we want to really explore and expand, and the center wants to take a lead at that. So we'll do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, like the Mexican like codices are like really, really incredible. And that's a thing. Like, I think that like broadly we have like some familiarity with like hieroglyphics, right? And there's Otto Neurath himself like made a direct connection between Egyptian hieroglyphics and drew kind of like a straight line between that and his work with Marie and Gerard Arndt's with isotype, and like that the Mexican codices I think are things that include data, include maps, pictorial like representations that are like really, really like just I think underappreciated, underexplored, understood, and like that's probably that's one of I'm sure many sources of future inspiration.
Right. So next question is from John Stephenson, and he asks, have you studied Von Humboldt's visualizations? And if so, how impactful were they at the time?
So I mean, his I think like insanely impactful. My understanding is that Humboldt's publications look like Charles Darwin sets out on the Beagle and goes to the Galapagos, right? Because Humboldt's publications. Like there's a lot of examples of like scientists from across the 19th century who, it's not that they were just inspired by Humboldt's publications, like they were inspired by Humboldt himself. They were in direct correspondence. One of the pieces in the exhibition from like the 1850 or so, like Humboldt wrote to this person and he said, you should go make this graphic. It's going to be great. So yeah, my understanding of Humboldt is that America kind of got washed clean of Humboldt because of what happened with Germany in the 20th century. And so, Humboldt gets the equivalent of a ticker tape parade reception in America. And there's all kinds of towns and sites named after Humboldt throughout America. And like Humboldt was a really, really popular, celebrated hero, even here in America, far, far away from where he lived. But and that's I think something that's it's exciting to kind of reclaim some of his genius and his legacy.
Right. So I will be. I'll put in the chat Humboldt's Vion. We have 3 originals, but of course, his work has been so much influence of his work. So I'll do that. The next question is, how about data visualization in the Middle Ages, maybe even incorrect scientifically, as a way to influence the population with religious and secular, that is to say, kings and princes ideology?
Yes. So I don't know. So I'm really spotty on the idea of like data visualization for the masses. And so my rough understanding of medieval times is that like we're pre-Gutenberg, and it's like there's an elite priestly caste and a noble caste who has access to books, which are manuscripts, which are super, super valuable, very, very expensive. So I don't know about the relationship between kind of data visualization and the masses, but data visualization in the elites is really, really like it's definitely there. And so you see data visualization kind of emerge from a couple different traditions. So one is looking at the cosmos, so looking up in the sky and getting more and more precise and scientific maps of the sky, and tracking cosmological events. And as you get more and more sophisticated kind of astronomy, you need more and more sophisticated instruments, better lenses, et cetera, et cetera. And so it's like kind of one of the ingredients, not entirely better and better in data visualization, but better and better science. The other is genealogical trees. And so there's a religious angle to this, which is like, let's prove that Jesus descended from David. Here, look at the map, look at my map of time. See, it's true. Like there's that kind of aspect to it. And then there's also let's prove that, this sovereign king has the divine power to rule over us. See, look at the map, see how his blood is pure. There's that kind of perspective as well. And we have a very late example of this, which is in the tradition of these genealogical trees. And I picked it for the exhibition, even though it's later, it's like a 1780 or 1790 tree in the exhibition. I picked it because it actually looks like a tree. And so there's this skeuomorphic metaphor of showing the family tree as a tree itself. And it's just aesthetic, like it's aesthetically a beautiful work. But those trees go really far back. And from all the resources, I think Sandra Rengen's Taschen book, The History of Information Graphics, does like the best job, explaining kind of the medieval, maybe not data visualization, but medieval kind of like information graphics.
Great. Let's see. So then this Onyx Salgado asks, he first mentions great presentation, thank you. In these visualizations, could these visualizations be found in art like painting, drawing, serigraphy, etc.?
They show up in like portraits, in like some state portraits and that kind of thing. I mentioned both the Menard portrait and also the Lincoln like the Lincoln cabinet portrait. That's kind of like an exception. That's not like, people more often get their state portrait done with a map in view, with whatever territory they conquered or whatever, in the background. Like that happens a lot more than people have a chart in their state portrait, but it does happen. They exist. So I'm not sure if that's what the question is, but that's a fun little tidbit.
Thank you. Another question, following up on studying data visualizations in Asian countries, anything older before Europeans came in? Also, have you looked at indigenous cultures' methods of data visualizations? I think you answered this in a previous question, but if you want to elaborate, you can.
This is like, I feel like there's not a really good kind of summary kind of like shot, but like, I think there's two things. Like one, that they're like, people, like, where does this all come from? This all comes from agriculture. Like it all comes from the idea of, how much wheat or how much rice or how much whatever have we grown, and like we need to make some accounting of that. We need to count how much of it we have so that we can manage it. And that's sort of like that's where data comes from. That's where all this sort of originates. Like the tabular sort of like accounting of agricultural products, is not a European thing. That's a global thing. And in many cases, I think it even like predates like written language, as you have this like, scoring, it's called scoring because like, what are you doing? You're scarring something, right? Like you're scarring a rock or a piece of wood or something. And and so that's a universal phenomenon. And so I think that there's a lot of examples across the world of really interesting ways of recording data, and many of those recordings are in fact data visualization. Like the Inca like counting rope, like for whatever reason, like screams to mind of of just like a really, really interesting way of like seeing data. But like that all said, like, so you're going to see like little like unique like solutions to doing this. But like we should also remember, like the scientific revolution is like very, very specific, and the industrial revolution is very specific. It kind of like starts in a particular geography and it takes over the entire world. And we're kind of like living in its, you know, we're living in its wake, for better or for worse. Like we're here, and modern data visualization is very much a part of that phenomenon. And so it does have like a geographic nature to it.
Very good. So Jerry Rosenthal asks, has anyone done a study of the impact of various data visualizations the impact of various data visualizations in the larger world? And then he says, for example, it's my understanding that Lincoln kept a copy of the Hergesheimer slave population map in his office during Civil War. I just want to say we have that map. I will put that link in the chat. But I mean
that's the map that's in the exhibition. So yeah, it's very hard. I believe so. There's modern social scientists try to figure out like, is this the right way to make a bar chart, or is that the right way to make a bar chart? And they have ways of understanding like how fast can you get the insight, or like how long do you remember the insight? There's so they have different techniques, and that tradition, like they have modern tools on how to kind of like define those particular metrics of success. But like the ideas behind that are very, very old. And even Playfair wrote about, one of the quotes I read from him, like it wrote about like, what is learning? What is knowledge? How do you convey information? So this is something that's like the plain kind of like information success metrics have been part of the craft for a very long time. And that's because it's like the crafts are, exist in a competitive marketplace for attention. And so data visualization is competing with just plain prose. So that's real. I think it's harder to really pinpoint kind of like the cultural impact of particular pieces. My own experience as a designer is like, there's a very long tail to content, especially today. And like, you don't really know if something's successful the moment you launch it. It might take a very long time. I think about like that gap that we saw between Playfair and Crome, right? Like that's like a, I don't know, like 17, 18-year gap, from when Playfair publishes to where Crome imitates. I mean, that's like a long gap. And, does Playfair think he's a success? Does he think he's a failure for 15 years because nobody's imitated him yet? Like, I don't know. Like as a creative, I think it's important to learn to kind of get past that kind of thing. And like you do need like a certain like particular confidence in the work that it is useful. And really the only way that that it's useful is that like you're able to keep making things. But it's hard to distinguish like if a particular thing is kind of like really successful. I wish it was easier. Believe me, I do.
Fun technical question. How should color be used to represent numeric data? There seems to be no standard key.
Yeah, colors. So, I mean, color is the most difficult tool we have. It's also the most enticing and most powerful tool we have. Rob Simon has a great, also 6-part series on color that I really recommend. I'll try to find the link. Maybe somebody can beat me to it. So yeah, color design is really, really hard. One of the reasons it's really, really hard is because everybody sees color differently. But again, it's so alluring. You have to engage in it, and there's no like, it really is design. It really, I don't know if it's an art, but it's a design in that like you really need a human as part of that loop. It's not something. Like you can choose a default color palette, but you're really just, that's a fine place to start, but you're really leaving a lot on the table when you just stop there. And so there are particular color palettes that kind of don't make any of like any of the big major transgressions. And so, but like really like that's just like a starting point. You know, that's not the way you get a color palette that attracts attention and inspires.
Right. Let's do a fun question. Do you, well, they're all fun, but this one is particularly, do you have a favorite really bad data visualization when form or design did not match the data/subject?
A really favorite bad data. Well, I'll recast the question in that there's a lot of work that in particular, you know, communities or particular times have been unfairly criticized. And I mean, the one modern example that screams out is Nigel Holmes' work generally, but in particular, Edward Tufte, you know, made this just really insensitive and honestly unsophisticated attack on some of Nigel's work in one of his earlier publications. And Tufte's gotten, there's a real magic to some of what Tufte did originally. And then there's just quite a lot of bad vibes to like everything else that followed. And in particular is his attack of Nigel's work. And Nigel's work, for anybody who doesn't know, Nigel's led graphics at Time Magazine for quite a while and just did incredibly innovative stuff, very inspired actually by the isotype movement. And Nigel's work at Time, but also the books he published are just absolutely inspiring. You know, it's one of like the most incredible resources we have from like the last 30, 40 years is his contributions. And so I would highlight that as like something that like a lot of people like kind of poo-pooed, you know, particularly because of Tufte. But like, yeah, I mean, like any industry, there's kind of like inner, you know, inner field kind of like friction. Yeah. But that's one where I'm on this, I'm generally always like a proponent of like, again, like blue ocean thinking, like we need more of all of this stuff, good and bad. Like the more of it, the better. Like we need to advance this craft. Like we're in a world that desperately needs to be better informed. Yeah, so it's hard to really come down hard on anything. Right.
So this question is from Connie Chen. Hi, Connie. She asks, New York Times opinion columnist Charles Blow has written, "Maps don't lie," in a commentary on the Sharpie Gate hurricane map. Do you have a comment on this?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I actually have. Oh man! So Kenneth Field gave out at a conference last year Sharpies that say cartography pen on them, which is just great. I don't remember what that particular op-ed was about, but yeah, I mean, I think that we're lucky that right now we don't have people who are using data visualization to manipulate in a more sophisticated manner than just, Sharpies on a map. There's a lot of potential for much more manipulative visualization than we're experiencing today.
Okay, we're whittling down here, maybe a few more questions. Let's see. Okay, this is from Matt Plitch, and he says, moving from the rich shorty of data visualization to the promising future ahead, what do you believe will be the next quantum leap forward? And what role do you hope to play in that impending sea change?
Oh boy. So I think that we touched on this a little bit earlier, and I think that's the reintroduction of illustration into data visualization. And so there's this, there are pinpoints of light across the history of people using illustration, pictorial drawings things that look like what you see in the real world with your real life to convey statistical knowledge. And a lot of it is is blunders, and they're making all kinds of errors. Isotype probably does the best job of formalizing it into any kind of coherent structure. But I believe that there is a future where illustration comes back in. And right now, I'm not going to tilt my well, maybe I will tilt my camera. But like right now, I have two desks in my office. Like I have what I'm standing at now, which is my digital desk, and then like way down here, you can see I have an analog desk. And I have an analog desk because I sketch, because I draw things. And like one of the projects I'm working on right now is very illustration forward. And so I believe the future, maybe this isn't the most important thing that goes forward, but I'm very hopeful for the role of illustration in the future of data visualization.
Great. This is from Randy Crome, and he says, fantastic job, RJ. Have these original hand-drawn data visualizations faded and lost their original colors over time? And then he asks the technical question, have there been efforts to physically restore them? Similar to restoring famous paintings, how are the original stored and protected? I can answer that last part.
Yeah. I mean, in some cases, yes, absolutely. The Priestley timeline in the collection, I think, was famously like used as wallpaper, and before it was reclaimed. And so yeah, there's examples where like the color is shot. But then there's other examples when you open the page and like it just knocks you over. Where there's like the magentas and the cyans, like they're just so, like they're so bright and they're so brilliant, and it's louder and crazier than like anything you would expect from history. So I think that there's a real range. Florence Nightingale's work, her famous polar area diagrams. One of them is done in color, and I've looked at so many copies of this particular chart. She went through several printings across the year, and each of those all the surviving examples, you can look at them and you can kind of compare them, and how much variation was there across the printings, and then how much variation is there because of how they fluctuate across time. So you can make some of those comparative and see that, like, yeah, sure, like sometimes stuff degrades, but like in many cases, I think they're just as brilliant as ever.
Interesting question by Ari here, and she asks, have you studied ancient Egyptian data visualization, especially in light of Cleopatra's focus on record keeping?
No, I haven't studied ancient Egyptian visualization, but send me a link. I'd love to learn more. That sounds great.
All right, so I think what we'll do is we'll go to one last question. I think it's a nice way to end here. So let me just find, oh yes, this is by Jack Joseph, and he says, fabulous presentation. If you don't mind sharing, could you describe your background and what led you to work in this field?
Oh, wow. Yeah, I mean, so I think the high points are that as a child, I grew up in a very artistic, very creative family. I went to engineering school, and engineering was much more narrowly focused. And so I learned how to be very quantitative. But coming out of engineering school, I really missed a lot of that artistic production. And I missed kind of the human aspect of that artistic production. And so I went to grad school and more or less studied people in grad school and made a commitment to information graphics during grad school. And, that was almost a decade ago. And so since grad school, I've been learning this field, and I'm very extraordinarily lucky that there's not only so many resources from the long history of the field, but such a vibrant community, and a lot of them have been in the chat today that are also enthusiastic for it, and that I've been able to learn so much from everybody, benefit from their tools, benefit from their scholarship, and benefit from their information graphics, and try to learn how to do it better. There's no such thing as like perfect information, but there's always better information. We can always do it better, and that's sort of like the attitude that I try to carry with me through my work and just always try to improve. It really is a lifelong, I believe it's a lifelong journey, but that it's a worthwhile journey. Yeah.
Well, with that, RJ, I want to thank you ever so much for a fantastic presentation and for sticking around to answer most of the questions. There were some doubles in there, which I consolidated. So thank you very much. I will be, in the next couple of weeks, the center, we'll be sending out the recording, and it'll include everything, the text, and it'll include the links. Several people have asked about the links. A lot of data visualization aficionados over here who know a lot, and so we want to capture that. We'll send that out as well. For 350 of you, you will receive the keepsake we put together, which is right there, as that RJ is showing off. And then please watch for our newsletter. October 1st is usually, the first of the month is usually when we send it out. That's our primary way to get information out. Of course, we put stuff on Twitter and on the website and that sort of thing. But we have plans to have at least one speaker every month between now and December, and just working out the details. So come back, and as always, you can reach us via email. And if you're not on the mailing list, or you said no and now you want to get on it, just send an email to Rumsey Map Center at stanford.edu, and we would be happy to add you to the mailing list. Again, RJ, thank you so very much. And thank you for all these participants who have stuck around till the very end. I mean, there's still 180 of you here, so it's wonderful. Thank you again, and have a wonderful weekend. Bye, everyone.